When I was growing up, my older brother raced flat-track motorcycles, and as a result, my dad and him were gone most weekends during the racing season. Sometimes my mom, my younger sister, and myself would tag along, but my mom was never really into it, so she would keep my sister and me home most of the time and plan fun things for us girls to do during the weekend. And this incident happened on one of those weekends where we stayed home back in 1987, so I was about 10, and my sister was about 8. It started out like any other Sunday, with my dad and my brother gone. My mom took us out to eat McDonald's. We went to the mall, and then we came home to play Monopoly and watch some cable. At around 10 p.m., my sister and I started to get sleepy, so my mom brought out the sleeping bags for all 3 of us to sleep in the living room together. I had to ask my mom years later what time this was, because as a kid I didn't really pay attention to the clock so much. So around 2 a.m., someone starts banging on our front door. Our front door was pretty strange. It had 4 large panes of glass that weren't opaque, so they were covered with small curtains. We all wake up to this pounding and rush to the door and look out one of the windows. There's this girl at the door. She was probably in her late teens or early 20s, and I remember her wearing a white and blue windbreaker. She's frantic and crying and begging my mom to let her in because she said her boyfriend is chasing her and she's afraid he's going to kill her. My mom remained calm as hell in this scary situation and said, "I'm sorry, love. I can't let you in because I've got 2 young children with me, and I can't risk your boyfriend harming them if he gets in. I can call the police for you if you just stay here." Of course, that didn't sit well with the girl, as she started crying more and pointed to her foot that was broken and in a cast. "Please, ma'am, you have to let me in. He's coming for me." Again, my mom politely refused and turned and ran into the kitchen and called 911. Our phone was mounted on the wall in the kitchen with a ridiculously long cord, so she was able to go back to the door while on the phone with dispatch and told her the police were on the way. This just made the girl go even more crazy. "I don't need the police because I'll be dead before they get here." My mom apologized again and said she was sorry, but she wasn't going to open the door. At this point, the girl just turned around and walked off into the darkness. And about 5 or 7 minutes later, police show up. My mom gives a statement, and as she's doing so, my dad and brother come back home from the race. My dad didn't even turn off the truck. He just ran up and looked terrified, asking what was going on. While my mom is telling my dad what happened, another officer walked up and said that he didn't see anyone, but he found a shoe in the street in front of our house. The police leave, and we all sit in the living room for a bit to decompress. I remember thinking that maybe my mom wasn't being very nice to the girl, and should have just let her in. Fast forward to 2001, and it's about a week after I gave birth to my first son. Family and friends are at my house and doting on my baby. After most people leave, there's just my parents, my sister, me and my son sitting in my living room this time. And I made a comment about how I didn't really love the neighborhood we moved to, but I was proud of actually having a home with my husband. Then my sister says, "Hey Mom, remember that lady that came to our door demanding to come in?" At this point, I can tell my mom and dad weren't comfortable talking about it, because they gave each other nervous glances. So my sister, being the asshole that she can be, says, "Why didn't you just let her in? I wonder if her boyfriend did end up killing her." My dad interjects and says that my mom did the right thing because it was late and we were home alone. Then he adds this little end to it. Plus, they ended up finding her car with their boyfriend smoking dope a few blocks over. They had a rope, duct tape, 2 shovels, and a shit ton of knives in the trunk. My sister and I said in unison, "What?" I asked why we were never told about this, and my dad said they decided not to tell us so we wouldn't feel unsafe in our own home. Finding this out made me feel like a huge jerk, because I had always thought that my mom was being somewhat rude, and I always wondered what happened to that girl. Now I know my mom most likely prevented a home invasion with her tough but right decision, to deny this girl entry to our home. Learning about that sent chills down my spine. Even writing it out now gives me goosebumps. So my let's not meet encounter happened 7 years ago. I haven't really spoken about it since it happened, as I just kind of wanted to move on, and I was really unnerved by the whole experience. I was 25. I'm a female, and I was working a job as an admin assistant office worker to tide me over and pay the bills until I eventually figured out what the career of my dreams was. I was tired of the job. I had been there about a year when this happened, and believe me, when the creepy shit went down, I was certainly incensed to get myself on a decent career path and the hell out of this place. So you understand my old workplace building, which will give you a clear picture of how this began. I worked in a somewhat old building with a few floors, and on each floor were numerous office spaces, which were rented out by different companies. It was a pretty open-plan building. Some parts were more dilapidated than others, and it was in serious need of refurbishment to bring it A, up to health and safety standards, and B, cosmetic standards for the general public. How the offices on my floor were set out meant that our small office, which only consisted of 4 to 5 workers on different days, was situated at the front of the building, with access through the front and back of the building, but nobody really used the back. Our staff quarters, as we called them, the lunchroom, were situated at the back of the building, and being an older style building meant there was a long hall and lots of space in between the office and staff quarters. Staff quarters was only used for lunch breaks, and as we were such a small office, we all rotated our lunch breaks so that only one person was off for lunch in the lunchroom at a time. Nobody else really used the lunchroom, as they preferred to go out and get lunch from the nearby shops, but as I had a shorter lunch break, it was always me, alone in the lunchroom at the back of this old creepy-ass building, by the rear entry point. Other parts of the building were now under refurbishment, so there was a lot of upheaval in certain spaces and areas, but we managed to retain ours as normal for the while, before building work was scheduled to begin on our floor. Bear in mind that the lunchroom was so far back from the main offices that nothing could be heard or seen either way. There were only 2 companies on the ground floor where I was situated. The other one was on the other side of the building and used the front entrance, but we rarely saw them, and certainly didn't keep track of their staff members or clients, as there was no need for us to see who was going in and out. I was sitting in the lunchroom one day eating, heater going as it was freezing, minding my own business, when out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow quickly sweep past the door from the light underneath it. It wasn't unusual for new clients to be wandering around looking for the specific office they required, and as we were on the ground floor, there was often a slew of stupid people wandering the corridors aimlessly, looking for the office that they needed. We did have a code entry system on the front door and a telephone system, so you could press the office you needed to get into. It would call through and they would let you in, so people couldn't just walk in without being let in, if you understand what I mean. We also had a code for workers to use to get through the front door. As I said, the back door wasn't used much apart from the odd worker who had a set of keys for it, and it was completely unmonitored. I wasn't too startled, even when the lunchroom door opened on this particular day and a smart-looking man put his head round, suited and booted and smelling like expensive cologne. I honestly was more embarrassed to see someone as attractive peering in, as I was sat there with mayo splatter on my shirt and a mouthful of bread looking like an absolute state. But hey, I didn't usually see anyone back there. "Can I help you?" I asked him, trying to clean myself up. He laughed and said that I looked like the one who needed help, and I admittedly laughed back, aware that he was still at the door and not imposing on me in any way, yet. When I laughed along with him, he seemed to take that as an invitation to come right in and sit opposite me at the table. To my surprise, he took some food out of his expensive-looking leather bag and started brazenly eating a sandwich. "I'm the HR manager for this company upstairs, and every time I go out to get my lunch, I always wondered who was sitting in here alone, so I just thought I'd have a look," he said, still eating and seeming very calm and chilled. The weird thing about him was that he seemed so normal. Nothing about this guy made me worried. In fact, it was nice to have some company on my lunch break, as most of the time I just sat scrolling through crappy news articles on my phone. We carried on chatting, mostly about mundane stuff. I asked him about his job and the company upstairs, and he asked me about mine. I asked him about where he usually took his lunch breaks. You know, just normal small talk. But it felt more comfortable than that. This guy was super charming, and he made me feel at ease. That part is the most chilling to me. I was totally at ease with him, and unguarded. It became a pretty regular thing for him to join me in the lunchroom, and honestly I was beginning to get a bit of a crush on this guy. He had a good job, he was attractive, he was very charming and normal, and I began looking forward to seeing him. Stupid, I know. A little attention from an attractive guy, but hey, I was single and not bad looking, so I figured, why can't I have a harmless little crush? He had told me his name was Alan, and honestly, I didn't intend to take it anywhere with him. I was totally happy single at the time, and I was getting some minor flirtations from him, but nothing that confirmed he had a crush on me too, or wanted to take it any further. He moaned about the building work taking place, and how the whole upstairs offices were a mess. The break rooms and such had all been gutted, and he was glad to have somewhere to eat his lunch that nobody else knew about from his office. At this point, I didn't even think this guy was a creeper at all. Until one day, when things took a turn. Alan stormed into the lunchroom one Thursday, and I swear in his eyes I saw the look of a caged animal. You know that crazy look? You know the restless and jittery and hyper look that kind of says someone isn't thinking straight at all? I immediately had my guard up a bit, because I had never seen him like this before. It freaked me out the way he stormed into the room, slammed his bag down on the table, and started ranting about how his boss was a cunt and he wished he could gut him like a fish, all while pacing around, running his hands through his hair, beads of sweat forming on his brow and rage in his eyes. I'd always thought his eyes were so pretty before. They were a steely blue, but right now they somehow looked darker and more imposing than ever. I tried really hard to pacify him and calm him down. I was repeatedly saying it would be okay, to calm down and just eat with me. Whatever had happened, I'm sure it could be sorted out. He slumped down in a chair, and I went over to him, kind of standing beside him, but obviously over him, and I put my hand on his shoulder to try and console him. With that, he flew up and pushed me back against the wall. I was stunned and couldn't speak. His body was pressed against me, and almost like through his rage, he was in a trance-like state. After he pushed me against the wall, he just stood there, his hands holding my wrists down by my sides, almost like he was taking some weird comfort from the fact that he had me up against the wall. He buried his face into my neck, and I was frozen on the spot. What the fuck is going on here? I always said I would never be one of those girls in an emergency or dangerous situation to freeze, but honestly, I had never been in this type of situation, and I could tell he was really volatile in this precise moment. I really didn't know what he was going to do, so I didn't want to risk pissing him off, then have him attack me or something. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, his face buried in my neck, still holding my wrist quite forcefully, when all of a sudden he licked my neck and said, "You smell nice." Yes, he actually licked my neck. Seemingly calmer, that's when I decided, nope, I'm not standing here with this person who's clearly unstable, holding me up against a wall in anger, then suddenly being all soft-spoken again and licking my neck in this weird predatory way. And that's what it felt like to me right at that second, and I felt so stupid for starting to eat with this guy and not even question why he was coming to our lunchroom. I told him to get off of me. I was leaving. At this point, I was prepared to take a beating. It shouldn't have been like that, but honestly, I didn't know what his deal was. Was he crazy? Just emotional or upset? Was he trying to seduce me, or was he going to hurt me? I don't fucking know. At this point, I realized I don't even know anything about this guy. We spent half an hour to an hour a day in each other's company, passing the lunch hour, but I didn't really know anything about him as a person. It had been a couple of weeks of lunches together, and I realized how short an amount of time that was to really have any idea about a person. He let go of my wrists, and then in the most sinister tone I've ever heard, he said, "You always seemed like you wanted it to me, you fucking whore." Before I could respond, he grabbed his bag and stormed out of the lunchroom, and tears sprung to my eyes. I cracked the door open just to make sure he'd gone, and I sprinted back to the front of the building where my office was. I told the guys in there everything that had just happened. They were absolutely fuming. They knew this guy had been hanging around me in the lunchroom, but as I had always been comfortable with it, and they thought Alan was okay, nobody ever thought anything of it. They actually thought it was hilarious every day when I came back from lunch all tongue-tied after my encounter with attractive Alan. They insisted we marched upstairs and put in a complaint at his company, and I knew that even if I didn't agree, they would march up themselves and do it. Eventually I agreed after feeling shaky and vulnerable, but I knew I didn't want to have to face Alan after the incident in the lunchroom. I went up regardless, flanked by two guys I worked with, one of whom was my immediate boss. As we began explaining the situation, it was evident that something was very wrong. The woman and the man from the upstairs company looked confused when I explained about their HR manager, Alan, and what he'd done. They explained that their HR manager was a female named Jules, and that I must have been mistaken because there was no Alan that worked at that company. We asked every single company in the building, and not one had an Alan working for them, and none ever had. We eventually came to the conclusion that Alan had been coming in every day for lunch, but with absolutely no idea why, what for, or where he came from. We also didn't know if he had the building code or a set of keys for the back, and we didn't know how he had come in unnoticed, wandering freely throughout the building. The locks were changed, the code was changed, and CCTV was installed. Plus, stringent security checks were put in place at the building after this incident, with everybody entering being monitored. I never saw Alan again, and I still to this day don't know why he was coming into the building every day, having lunch with me, pretending to be an office worker, and I don't know what happened that day when he flipped. So yeah, this isn't the usual creeper story, but Alan, let's never meet again. When I was younger, about 10 years ago, I got into bird watching. I was around 12, so it wasn't really official by any means. I was just some kid that liked to sneak up on birds, take pictures, and look them up in books. I decided to start this hobby by making a list with pictures I had printed from the library of native birds in my region. Every weekend I'd wander around the neighborhood in search of new birds. With a few ponds and a large creek in the area, I found quite a few within my first few weeks. However, there was one bird I had set as my sort of white whale, due to its rarity in the area: the black vulture. We have tons of turkey vultures in my area. They're the most common, but fewer black vultures. They're a bit hard to tell the difference if they're flying too high. The best way to determine which vulture it is has to do with how much gray-white is on one of their wings. If they got closer, you can eventually make out the red head of a turkey vulture, as I often did disappointingly. Unfortunately, I can't remember the exact date or what month it was even. I believe sometime in the fall, however. But one weekend, I decided to spend the next 2 days searching high and low for the mysterious black vulture. I went climbing over the small wire fencing around a nearby brushy area. As per usual, keep out signs be damned, and searched. Usually you had the best luck finding scavenger birds on roadkill, beside the road, and there so happened to be a small 2-lane winder that mirrored the creek nearby, just through the foliage. So I cut across the sort of mini forest headed in that direction. As much as it made me sad to see a dead deer or possum, it was a common sight on this road as both sides are open, with trees and undergrowth almost choking it. There are some parts of the road that almost become a sort of tunnel due to leaves intertwining above. It was incredibly easy for a deer or some other animal to jump in front of a car in the dark, with neither party realizing it until it was too late. I didn't have much luck. There were a few crows on the smear of a squirrel, and I saw a few ducks swimming in the creek beside me, but nothing big. It started getting late, but the sun was still up, and despite the dangers of walking down a forest road in the dark, I was determined to stay out as long as possible. I decided to reach a small park area at the end of the road, and then I'd start to make my way back. I went under a small tunnel of leaves and came out the other side. I was delighted to see the familiar shape of a large bird in the sky circling. It was just the right shape and size to be a vulture, but I had no hope of checking for the grayness of its feathers as the sunlight was limited. Instead, I was stuck following it as it slowly began to sink lower. After about 10 or so minutes it landed, and I carefully snuck forward, cautiously avoiding anything that could alert the bird of my presence. I sunk low to the ground, realizing that the bird had landed in a small clearing at the far end of a park. It was just a small open field, slightly tilted down a hill with the parking lot at the top. I had been there before, as it was a fun spot for kids to roll down the hill because of how steep it was. I approached it from the bottom, excitement brimming when I heard several squawks and shrieks of other birds. Black vultures are more aggressive than turkeys, and I was hoping to catch a spat. I got to the edge of the clearing and pulled out my binoculars. Two things hit me at once here. One, I had found it odd that they were in the middle of the park rather than closer to the road, where you'd assume they'd find roadkill. Though I reasoned, things could die anywhere, even in the middle of a park. Second, however, it smelled awful. The scent was rather light, but I'd been known to have a really sensitive nose. But this was just sharp, coppery, like when you pull rotten ground meat out of a bag. I had smelled roadkill before, and in the heat of the day, it smelled bad, but nowhere near like this. When I put my binoculars to my eyes, I expected a deer corpse and birds fighting. I never in a million years thought I would see a corpse of a completely different kind. The birds were there, and I remember the faint pang of excitement I still had, recognizing the proud head of a black vulture, before the image of it sitting on the chest of a naked woman sucked the life out of me. I was frozen. I couldn't look away. My throat tightened with vomit, and my eyes were drawn to her. The birds had done surprisingly little to her body. She had what I think were cuts, but most of her was intact. What wasn't, the birds were at. Her eyes, lips, and genitals were red and shredded. If there was a big defining wound, I had missed it between the gathering of birds and the fading light. But what I did see, I can never forget. I hadn't forgotten. I can pull out the image so clearly now, even after all this time. She was pale, almost blue in places, with blonde, crinkled hair. I sat there stupidly, for who knows how long, as the sun sunk behind the trees. This was a time before cell phones were a common thing, and I had quite the hike back home. I realized now that I was in shock, and I could only start to move when the sudden fear that whoever did this could be nearby hit me. I forced myself to slowly waddle backwards into the trees, not taking my eyes off the body. I didn't want to turn around for some reason. I was so scared someone would be behind me. I thought if I just backed up forever, maybe nothing would happen. It was dusk, and suddenly there was light. High beams from the top of the hill, a single pair. I heard the screech of the tires as the car wheeled out, and I listened to it veer off to the left and away down the road, opposite in the direction I was headed. That was the last straw, and I ran the entire way back the second I could no longer hear it. I crashed through at least a mile of brush, and while I was smart enough to have had boots and thick jeans on, my arms were bare and bleeding by the time I stopped. I paused midway through the brush by my house, realizing that embarrassingly, I had pissed myself in fear at some point, before nearly crawling my way through people's yards to get home, avoiding all passing cars. The horror didn't completely end there, as I was home alone until past midnight, as my mom worked late at a diner nearby. It's stupid, and I regret it to this day, but no, I didn't call the police instantly nor inform my mom. I was stupidly afraid that if I did, my mom would get mad at me. I would never be allowed to go outside again, or worse, that they wouldn't believe me. I locked all the doors, double-checked, took a quick shower, and locked myself in my room. I had fallen asleep somehow by the time my mom came home. I confronted her in the morning at least, but by that time, when we made the call together, the body had already been found. They took my statement and we never got any calls back. After that, I stopped birdwatching. I tried my best to find an article or news somewhere about this, but I failed in finding anything. It probably doesn't help that I can't remember the exact date. There are very few things I remember so well, this being a big one. I've never shared this story with anyone outside my own family, but I thought it might fit here, and I apologize if not. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here, as always. I just wanted to thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you guys like the video, please feel free to leave a like, comment, or subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback or suggestions for stories you'd like to see, or anything like that, be sure to leave a comment below, because I always read all of the comments. I have a pretty big update for the channel for you guys. So, as you guys probably know, things have been pretty rough lately for the YouTube horror narrator community. Basically, on YouTube, a bunch of advertisers pulled out, and now everybody's getting way less returns on their views and everything like that. So, I wanted to announce that I finally set up a Patreon account where you guys can donate and contribute to the channel if you like. Of course, it's never necessary. None of my content will ever be necessary to be paid for or anything like that. Basically, what Patreon is it's just a tip jar for artists, if you feel like supporting them. Of course, if you don't have the money or anything like that, please don't feel like you have to or anything. It's just there for people who want to. So I'll be leaving a link to that in the description of the video, and also probably in a comment with the timestamps for stories for this video. Please give me feedback on what you guys think about that. I'm a little bit nervous about it, but I hope it will go over well, and I hope you guys understand why I'm doing that. If you'd like to contact me, or if you have any stories you'd like to send in or that you'd like me to read, please be sure to take a look in the description of the video below. There will be links to all of my social media, including my Facebook, Twitter, and Gmail accounts. Send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the header of the email, or whatever you choose to send, what the title of the story is, what the theme of the story is, if it has any, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. If you're curious about the music used at all in this video, the music is always in the description below, in the order which it appears in the video, and I also leave links to the artists themselves in case you like their music and would like to give them support and check out more of their work. And of course, if you have any constructive criticism, please be sure to leave it in the comments below, as I'm always looking for new ways to improve the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.